We want to turn to politics now. Fulton County, Georgia, which will undergo another audit of 2020 absentee ballots following claims of fraud. The Friday ruling by a judge allows for the ballots to be unsealed and reviewed by a group of electors claiming Fulton County election workers counted fraudulent ballots. The review will be done under the guidance and supervision of a special master appointed by the court. It comes after the group filed a lawsuit in December. The state of Georgia conducted 3 audits soon after the election, all of which reaffirmed the original outcome of the race. Meanwhile, Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney continues to speak out, sitting down with national political reporter for Axios, Jonathan Swan, for Axios on HBO.
You're trying to chart a new course for the party, away from Donald Trump, away from the lie, and it just seems like there aren't people willing to buy what you're selling. Where do you get the hope for this, that this is going to work?
Because I love this country.
Right.
Because I believe in our democracy and I believe in our constitutional process and system, and because I look at it from the perspective of what's right. I think the future of our party has to be built around ideas. It has to be built around substance.
But which ideas?
And so I think we have to be able to make a substantive case for limited government, for low taxes, for a strong national defense, for securing our borders. The ideas and the substance and the policy are on our side. But we have to get back to a place where we're making those arguments.
How much culpability do Republican elites have for fertilizing the soil for the big lie?
That's not at all how I think about it. You won't be surprised to hear. I think
Why?
that when you look at things like voter fraud, it certainly exists. I will never understand the resistance, for example, to voter ID. I think you ought to have to show ID to go vote. There's a big difference between that and a president of the United States who loses an election after he tried to steal the election and refuses to concede and then continues to say the election was stolen, suggesting that our democratic process is insufficient of conveying the will of the people.
You don't see any linkage between Donald Trump saying the election's stolen and then Republicans in all of these state legislatures rushing to put in place these restrictive voter laws?
Well, I think you have to look at the specifics of each one of those efforts. I think if you look at the Georgia laws, for example, there's been a lot that's been said nationally about the Georgia voter laws that turns out not to be true.
But even the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, said that when this bill started to pick up momentum was when Rudy Giuliani was testifying that the Georgia election was a sham. I don't think anyone doubts that the reason 400-some voting bills have been introduced, 90% by Republicans, supported by the Republican National Committee. I don't think it's a coincidence after the election that this has happened.
Look, I think everybody should want a situation and a system where people who ought to be able to vote and have the right to vote can vote, and people who, don't, shouldn't. And again, I come back to things like
But what problem
voter
are they
ID.
solving for? What are all these states doing?
No, I think, each state is different.
What was the big problem in Georgia that needed to be solved by a new law? What was the big problem in Texas? What was the big problem in Florida? These laws are coming all around the states, and what are they solving for?
I think you've got to look at each individual state law. But I think what we can all agree on...
You can't divorce them from the context.
Well,
come on.
yeah, but I think what we can agree on is that what is happening right now is really dangerous. When I think about 2000, I think about sitting on the inaugural platform in January of 2001, watching Al Gore. Of course, we had won. I'm sure he didn't think he had lost. Mm-hmm. We had fought this politically very, very intense battle, and he conceded. He did the right thing for this nation. And that is one of the big differences between that and what we're dealing with now and the danger of Donald Trump today.
And Jonathan joins us now. And Joe, I want to go back to Jonathan's first question for Liz Cheney, which is, where are you going to get the support?
Right.
I found one person in Florida yesterday at a birthday party, diehard Republican, worked in the financial industry his whole life, turned independent only because of Trump, but if someone like Liz Cheney were to come along, he'd become a real, true Republican again. And the conversation was much like the ones we have, where the Republicans are turning the party into something it's not. It is the insurrectionist party. Then there are real Republicans, and the question is how many will coalesce in that group, and the Democrats. And we need a real Republican Party. What we don't need in this country is an insurrectionist party, and there is no conversation to be had with an insurrectionist, with a party that doesn't even want to believe in basic truths.
Well, a party that believes that that democracy, American democracy, is okay only when their side wins. I think you bring up a great point. We have three parties in America now. We have the Republican Party, we have the Democratic Party, and we have the Insurrectionist Party. And I think it's really important for people in the media to recognize that and to listen to what Liz Cheney's saying. And when she says something like she still supports voter ID laws, instead to say, oh, she's just as bad as he. No, she's not. No, she's not. And you might actually want to look into the fact that 80% of Americans, according to a Gallup poll, support voter ID and enhanced voter ID for people to vote. OK, and see, that's a debate. You want to have that debate. That's a debate that we can have between the guardrails of American democracy. All right. But for people to say, oh, well, if you support that, then you might as well be supporting storming the Capitol on 1/6. It's overly simplistic and it confuses the issues. Again, there are three parties in America. We have to recognize there's a Republican Party with people like Liz Cheney in there, Ben Sasse, Mitt Romney, others. There's a Democratic Party and there's an insurrectionist party for people that didn't recognize the 1/6 election, who are trying everything they can do to change the subject from 1/6. And don't want to face those facts. Jonathan, thanks so much for being there. A great interview with Liz Cheney, as always. Congratulations on that. It's very funny. I remember about a year ago, it must have been a year ago, 6 months ago on Twitter, somebody said, write the thing that will most surprise people about you. And Garry Kasparov, the great, obviously Russian chess master, who'd been harshly critical of Donald Trump and become something of a hero to many on the left, said, you all will be so surprised and so disappointed after Trump is gone by how conservative I actually am, to which I retweeted and said, amen. And Liz Cheney is there. You know, she's being heralded by people who've attacked her entire life. And when we get beyond this, they will start attacking her again. But you hear that interview. Guess what? Newsflash. Liz Cheney is a conservative.
She's not only a conservative, she's probably on the right of the party. She's a very staunch conservative. And people forget, I mean, she was a warrior, a partisan warrior during the Obama years. You know, she's now this anathema to the Republican base. But really, that's where her heart is. She's just decided to take a stand on January 6th and the big lie and Donald Trump. But the problem with all of this conversation is, you know, you talk about there being three parties. She really is a fringe figure in the Republican Party. It's not that there's this huge group of people who support her and Ben Sasse and Mitt Romney. Empirically, there aren't in terms of Republican voters. 70% of Republican voters consider Joe Biden illegitimate. There's polling to show that. 70%. That's extraordinary. That's where the party has gone. And the party actually has left Liz Cheney. And the real challenge she has, if she's going to chart this new course for the party, is she has to bring these voters back to the party. Many of them have left the party, and it's not clear that the people who consider themselves Republican voters are going to be amenable to what Liz Cheney is selling.
Yeah. So what's her next move?
Well, it's unclear to me, actually. Her primary election in 2022 is going to become a proxy battle for the future and in her view, the soul of the Republican Party. Donald Trump and his political operation are desperately trying to find one person to run against her. They haven't figured out who yet. And the problem for them right now is there's a number of people who've declared themselves. One of them had impregnated a 14-year-old and described it as a Romeo and Juliet situation. So he seems to be out of the picture or at least receding from view. But the problem for them is if the field remains divided, she's got a decent chance. If they settle on one, she's in real trouble because you have to remember with Liz Cheney, this is the other point that's really important to understand. You look at again, empirical. She is 3 times more popular among Democratic voters than among Republican voters. So when you talk about, the parties, you really need to just remember where the Republican electorate is at. They're not where Liz Cheney is right now. Yeah,
I mean, that's obviously, you should like those ratios reversed. And so much of this may just depend on the passage of time, the understanding that Donald Trump's not going to run for re-election. If he doesn't run for re-election, yes. I heard somebody shout my name.
He said, sure.
Oh, sure.
No,
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry, Jonathan. So, yeah, it depends. Passage of time, Jonathan, also the possibility Donald Trump doesn't run again and Republicans start doing what they haven't done in some time and start focusing on who can get elected president of the United States in 2024.
Yeah, and where they're at the moment, it's a very fragmented party because you have the House Republican Conference, who their theory of the case is basically double down on Trump. And we need to elevate Trump and run into the midterms on Trump. Mitch McConnell, his view is ignore Trump, hope that he recedes into the background. It's a strategy based on hope. Liz Cheney is in a third camp. She believes that the Mitch McConnell approach is dangerous and you actually need to confront Donald Trump and talk about it right now and excise him from the party. So it's a real muddled mess. And I don't know how they resolve it, frankly.